All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give folks a couple of minutes to trickle in. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Hicks, and on behalf of the NFL, United Way Worldwide, and the Character Playbook team here at EVERFI, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to our final event in our Character Playbook Black History Month series. To the teachers and students who are already a part of our Character Playbook family, thank you for tuning in these past few weeks. We really hope that through this series, we've illuminated how leaders in the past and present and the future leaders in your classrooms have and can leverage resilience, perseverance, empathy, effective communication, and other concepts of character education and mental wellness as vehicles for social change. Now, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with Character Playbook and would like more information on how to bring the program to middle and high schools in your community, or to receive the recordings of our previous events, send us an email at characterplaybook@everfi.com, and we're happy to exist. Now, because Black history is American history, do not take the end of this month or this event series as a sign that education and conversations about race, social justice, and civic engagement should end as well. In fact, there are a number of ways that you as a middle or high school student can get or stay civically engaged. And we hope today's discussion provides some strategies for both students and teachers to support continued conversation. Teachers, as a reminder, we have an anti-racism extension guide available to you through Character Playbook. Feel free to send us an email if you'd like for us to send it to you directly, as it is full of resources to help guide future conversations. Now, before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to extend my sincere appreciation and thanks to our EVERFI team behind the scenes that has made this series possible. Special thanks to Darian Johnson, Mariah Burke, and Mackenzie Kaiser for all of their hard work in bringing each of these panels to life. Without further ado, let's meet today's panelists. So our first panelist is image activist, children's advocate, and author of the children's book, Have You Thanked an Inventor Today, Patrice McLaurin. Up next is Dr. Kaycee Brock, who serves as the program director for KIPP Through College at the KIPP Foundation and is the former youth engagement director for the Warnock for US Senate campaign. From the Cleveland Browns, we welcome mental health advocate and offensive lineman, Chris Hubbard. A teen entrepreneur and founder of Slay It Proud, an apparel and content company focused on Black history and empowering youth, we welcome Janiah Hinds. And our final panelist is Dr. Andrew McIntosh, who serves as the Vice President of Curriculum at RISE. We are honored to have the Curator of Sports at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture and the consistent voice of this month's series, Dr. Damion, with us again to guide our conversation today. On behalf of EVERFI, the NFL, and United Way Worldwide, we give special thanks for his commitment to this initiative. So for the final time, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Thomas to get us started.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here for the third part of our conversation. Thus far, we've talked about the history of voting rights. We talked about how athletes have been involved in that process. Now we're going to focus in on you and how you can engage with voting and other civic issues. I want to start with Patrice, and then I want to have the rest of the panelists respond to this question. What does civic engagement mean to you in the broadest sense?
So to me, civic engagement is basically exercising your rights, your privileges, your duties as a citizen of your town or your city, right? So in other words, civic engagement means that you're being civically responsible. And those are like two sides of the same coin: civic engagement, civic responsibility. I sometimes even use the terms interchangeably. So when we consider this definition from a broader perspective, I think that it's imperative that we remember that civic engagement extends far beyond the voting booth, right? And that is, again, imperative. It's a must that we consider that, because, first of all, not everybody is going to exercise their right to vote, right? And that can be for a number of reasons, right? You have some people who just don't see voting as a viable solution to solving our nation's ills. And hey, that's okay. You know what? They're entitled to their opinion. But what they're not entitled to do is relinquish their charge of being active and responsible members of the community, right? And then you have other people who don't vote because maybe they were just released from prison, right? So these are people who are not exercising their right to vote, not because they don't want to, but because they can't. And to be clear, a lot of these people may have actually ended up in prison due to systemic racism and a fractured criminal justice system. Nevertheless, we are still expecting them to be responsible members of the community, right? And then we have our youth, who are, in my opinion, the most important citizens of the community, because they are the future of the community. They can't exercise their right to vote because they're not old enough yet. So again, when we consider civic engagement in the broader term, I think that we have to remember that that involves both political and non-political action, right? And that's really dope, because everybody's not political. I mean, personally, I'm not political, but I still get down in the community, right? So then when you consider middle schoolers and high schoolers and how they can engage in civic engagement, I think the low-hanging fruit, of course, is to begin in that space where that directly impacts you. And the obvious space is your school, right? Are there some things in your school that you'd like to see changed? If so, how can you affect that change? Like, I have a personal story. When I was a senior in high school, we actually wanted a Black history course at our school. So we initiated a petition. We got a few hundred, signatures on this petition. We presented this petition to our principal, and the following semester, we had a Black history course, right? So you can let your voice be heard in that respect. Let your voice be heard by attending your Board of Education meetings. And I know that the youth who are tuned in now probably thinking to themselves, this chick tripping. I am not going to a Board of Education meeting. But I mean, if you really think about it, you got all of these adults who are sitting in a room making decisions about your education, and you're not participating in the conversation. Allow your voice to be heard, right? Remember who you are, young people. Remember who you are. You are the youth. You are the mighty, mighty, mighty young. You are the energy source of this nation. You are our nation's future. And guess what? You got a voice, and your voice deserves to be heard. But here's the key, my beautiful and brilliant scholars, and I need y'all to hear me carefully. The key is to not believe the hype of who they're trying to convince you that you are, right? And we've all heard it. Oh, these young people, oh, they don't want nothing. Oh, they ain't doing nothing. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Don't believe the hype. Instead, know and understand that you have the power to choose, and you have the power to effect change. In fact, I dare say that your very first act of civic engagement should be to interrupt this lowered expectation of you. And I really hope that y'all can dig what I'm saying, young people. If they're expecting ignorance from you, give them excellence. Engage that way. Get active. So I'm sorry, again, to circle back, right? My definition of civic engagement in the broader sense is active participation in the affairs of your community, which can involve both political and non-political action, right? And again, what's dope about that is that it allows you to choose a lane that's specific to your skill sets. It allows you to choose a lane that's specific to your personal strengths. And then once you find your lane, you have to believe in yourself, believe in your capacity to do and be whatever it is that you choose to do and be, and then become the change that you want to see in your community.
Thank you for that very strong answer. Any of the other panelists want to respond to that?
Okay. I'll just jump in and reiterate much of what Patrice said. I think, I'll say it in 3 sentences. That's kind of how we kind of think and talk about it. So one, there's an issue within your community. So that's thing one. You are looking and thinking about all the resources and skills you have at your disposal to address that issue. And then ultimately you're trying to bring about change or create an impact. So, what is that issue in the community? What skills do you have to bring to bear to effect some change around that issue? And then how do you measure impact? I think in a nutshell, that's what civic engagement is.
Excellent. I think one of the key issues, and we're going to move beyond voting, but I want to start with voting. And part of the challenge is figuring out how to educate yourself. So how do middle and high school students who can't vote learn about politics and government prior to getting an opportunity to vote? What are some of the best ways that students can learn about voting and why it matters? Let's go with Dr. Kaycee.
Hello. I think it's really hard these days, I'll be honest, because news can be so skewed. Because I think a while ago we would have said, oh, just watch the news, read the paper, get as much information as you can. But as we now know, fake news spreads very quickly these days. And so you're not really sure where to get the most accurate information from. And so that is unfortunate. It makes it a little bit tougher. But I think for young people, using social media, as much harm as it does, there's so much good to it to find really reliable news sources that are not as biased, that are just giving information. I know a lot of students of mine prefer Twitter as the place to get news. TikTok now even has some reliable sources, but I think the big thing is just kind of vetting things, especially before you repost it, especially before you spread it around, making sure that you see a few different sources for the information that you find before you share it, because that's how things spread so quickly and so falsely. Also, there's some really great organizations out there, like When We All Vote, and other organizations that strive to just provide information about voting, about civic engagement, so that everyone can learn more about it without having to worry about whether or not it's skewed or not. Also, for teachers, providing sources, Tufts Circle is a really great resource that has a ton of data, a ton of information, really cool charts and things like that that you can use in classrooms, but that also students can use as well to get information. And then last but not least, once you do decide what kind of political affiliation you want to have, or you do decide who you want to support, young people can get engaged in local elections. You can volunteer, you can be an intern. Volunteering is like the main way in. Believe me, some volunteering actually leads to internships, sometimes paid. So don't look down at any volunteering opportunity. Just be awesome and you might get an internship. But to that point, getting involved in your local elections, once you decide what kind of political affiliation you want to have, is a really great way to understand how the entire process works and continue to be politically engaged thereafter.
It's a great response. I didn't think of that, the ways in which students could volunteer even before being voting age. I want to follow up on that question, because there are a number of students here that are close to being of voting age. And I know in your state recently just did an astronomical job of getting over 800,000 new people on the voting rolls. For those of us who are near that age, what is the process of registering to vote? Because I know some people find that to be intimidating.
Yeah, it is so easy to register to vote as a young person. Likely you will have to have some type of identification. So if you either get a state ID or you have a driver's license, that makes it a lot easier. And then your state will actually have a website that you can go to where you can register to vote. Also, there's, especially around election time, so many voting drives that are around that you could go to and just walk up, especially when COVID is over, or not like it was last year, where you can walk up, register to vote. But it's a pretty simple process. And I think that just getting registered, at least this is the way I look at it, it gives you an opening. So maybe you are not sure you're going to vote. Maybe you're not sure how you're feeling. I know a lot of young people right now feel really upset about politics and frustrated and feel like their voices aren't being heard. And there's a bunch of really old people who like don't understand where you're coming from. And so give yourself the option though, because here's what you don't want. You don't want right before it's time to vote, you change your mind and decide you want to vote and you can't. So registering just gives you the option. So I'd say that's like the first thing that's really important. But again, your local state will have an opportunity for you to be able to register. And sometimes even when you are going to get your license, that is the time that you can register as well. Yeah, and then some of the websites I mentioned earlier, like When We All Vote, they have their own, actually most organizations like that, where they're trying to get young people engaged on social media, have a link where you can just click on the link and it'll lead you to your local website where you can register to vote there too.
Great. Janiah, I want to come to you as our high schooler on today's panel. What advice do you have for your peers who want to use their platform to promote positive change but aren't sure where to start?
Yes, I would definitely say you first have to find what you're passionate about, because, you know, if you want to share with others, you need to have something you're passionate about that you're sharing. And second, you need to see, you know, what do you want to fight for? What's the problem you see? And you just have to be consistent, you know, start small and share with others, and you'll find a lot of things that people like, and people see what you're doing and they like what you're doing. Because for me, my passion may not be the same as what someone else's is. So I think it's very important to do something you're passionate about so you can continue sharing and be consistent with what you're sharing with others.
Oh, cool. Chris, I want to ask you a question about character development. You know, this is the NFL's Character Playbook, one of the signature programs of the leagues and its community outreach. How are character development and civic and community engagement intertwined?
To me, I feel like having those conversations. When you have those conversations, really tough conversations about what's going on in the community, that you see fit, things that you may believe that you see change in, how does it affect everybody that's around you? One of those things that we've done before, you know, just having those conversations about, you know, how we can change, you know, our firefighter, man, you know what I mean? It's just the people who work around you and how it affects us, you know, and when we had those conversations, it was just really tough because we wanted to see change. And now that you see things, you know, happening and things are starting to like kind of break out, I think for the main part, I think we're finally getting some kind of where justice, you know, and it makes everybody around us feel much safer. much more aware of things, and I think that's how it plays into effect of knowing what can we do, what can be asked of us.
I think that's a great response, because part of it is educating, as you're saying, becoming aware of what your opportunities are, what you can do, how you can bring change where you are. And that leads us to our next question. I want to ask Andrew this question specifically. We spent 3 weeks now discussing how sports can be a vehicle for change, particularly as it relates to voting. As we wrap up this series, what are some strategies and tools that educators attending today's event can use to help create safe spaces for their students to continue conversations around voting and civic engagement?
Yeah, I think that's a particularly good question. It should be something that, not just educators in the formal sense, but educators in the broader sense, so parents, coaches, others should be thinking about. Sport for us has been a space where people already put aside their differences, right? So people of different races, different ages, different communities, different nationalities kind of say, hey, I support this team or Y team or X player for whatever reason. And so using sport as our context to have difficult, tough, challenging conversations is in and of itself, I think, built into the nature of sport. So I think, recognition of sports value for that, I think is powerful. Relatedly, but I think also conversely, I think it's important for us not to assume that just because it is sport, it is good. Because sport can also reinforce some of the very things we are trying to teach about and educate about and change. And so, we have to put into sport what we want to get out of it, right? If we want sports to teach about inclusion, if we want sports to teach about anti-racism, if we want sports to teach about civic engagement, those are things that we have to sow into sport. We have to be intentional about having those conversations, and we need to create spaces where those conversations can take place. The other piece, I think, is a recognition that isn't always easy. So I'm going to the part of the question that talked about creating that safe space, right? There's a difference between, I think, what educators would call psychological safety, where there's no trauma or harm being done, and being uncomfortable, because we know that it is with discomfort that growth takes place. And so it's a recognition that what is safe is not necessarily always comfortable, as we think about how we set up these conversations and how we use sport, and how we create a space for this dialogue. Sometimes, our youth might need to be challenged. Sometimes we might need to challenge ourselves. Sometimes we need to allow them to challenge us. And so, I just really want to make a distinction. I don't think you meant it in terms of the question, but I think others might be confused. And I want to just be clear that we do need people to be uncomfortable sometimes and recognize that, hey, this is challenging, this is tough, and we may not have the answers. So educators, I think, do this conversation a great service by being honest on the front end, by saying, hey, we are about to address some topics that are of absolute importance for us, specifically for our communities and our country more broadly. We are going to engage with them. I do not have all the answers. You may not have all the answers, but there's absolute value in us hearing one another and learning from one another. If we start from that standpoint, I think we open ourselves up to much more positive conversations in this space, recognizing that we've all had different experiences, and there's a lot to be learned when those experiences are kind of brought to the table. So I think that's a really great question. I'd love to hear what others think about it. Maybe Janiah, as one of the young persons, Dr. Kaycee as well.
When I come to Patrice, I would like to hear you respond to to this question, because earlier you talked about students sort of exercising their power and speaking out and putting together petitions and things like that. And sometimes, as Andrew pointed out, that's uncomfortable for us as adults. What advice do you have to the educators and leaders, parents who are listening that might be encountering a student or a child that wants to be more engaged and wants to have their voice heard?
I would just encourage educators to foster that. If you have a student who's excited about having their voice heard, then foster that. You know, we can't silence our young people. History has already demonstrated to us that the revolution always begins, or at the very least, is fueled by the young, right? You had Kelly Ingram Park in Birmingham, and that was fueled by teenagers who actually, you know, protested, got up out of their seats, left their classrooms, marched downtown Birmingham, unfortunately were hosed down, water hoses, dogs were sicked on them, so on and so forth. They were actually arrested. My aunt was one of them, right? But it was young people. And on the strength of that, we saw change, right? So I think that the best thing that we can do, the best advice that I can give to any educator or any adult is, when you have a student who is demonstrating an interest in that, then you foster that, you know, and don't be afraid or fearful of the discomfort that might come from that. It's like Dr. McIntosh was saying, you have these conversations, and these conversations may be uncomfortable. But one thing we have to remember, and I consider it like this, right? We're trying to give birth to a new day. We're trying to give birth to a new experience. And one thing about giving birth is that it is traumatic, right? Giving birth is traumatic. So if we're trying to give birth to this new day, we're trying to give birth to this new experience, then we have to be okay with the trauma that comes along with that. But then, just like a new mother, after she's gone through the trauma of childbirth, when she looks at this newborn baby, she's all oohing and eyeing and kikiing and all of this good stuff. And she forgets about all of the pain that she experienced. She forgets about all of the trauma that she experienced. So allow these children to do what they do. Don't be afraid of the discomfort. Don't be afraid of the trauma, and know that that trauma is going to help us to bring forth a new day. And that's what we're seeking right now.
Can I just
Thank you.
pop in?
Yes, please do.
I agree 100% with what you all are saying. And most of the communities that I've worked in education have been communities that you come into it, and then years later it's gentrified and the community does not look the way like that it did when, you know, maybe like I first started working there. And there were a lot of conversations that I've had with young people about looking around in your current community that you're in and investing in it and taking pride in it and doing the best that you can to preserve it, make it better. Because a lot of times I think that students are taught, especially depending on if you're the first in your family, maybe to go to college, or you're the first in your family to maybe have certain different aspirations, maybe. Sometimes we're taught to get out of our community and just to look for something different or better, or maybe I don't know. I wish I knew what the demographic was of the students that we're talking to, but for most of my students, they were identified as Black and Brown, and look for something that maybe was more white or reflected something that was not them or their community. And I think that, and I hope we're coming back to this place of taking pride in wherever we come from and investing in that. Because I think when a young person is thinking about how to get civically engaged, I remember when I was working in a city in New York that I won't name, for my students, we were like, man, like this street is not, it's not cute. It doesn't look good. It doesn't make us feel good. We walk into the school building and we did something about it, and that was led by them. And so again, I think the point is to just stress for young people, just look around right now at where you are and make it a place that you want to come back to and that you want to grow and that you want to invest in, because I think that's the way that you come back 10 years later and you're running for office. You come back 15 years later and you're leading a nonprofit in your community. But I think it really starts now with making sure that it's a place that you can come back to. And the only way you can do that is to just kind of start investing in it now.
Oh, thank you. I want to ask this next question of Janiah and Chris. One of the big messages that we try to share at the museum is that change is possible, that profound and world-changing things can happen and be done by young people. And how does your knowledge and appreciation for Black history inform your current and future civic engagement? Start with Janiah.
Yes, Black history is definitely something that's a big influence on me. And it's, why I started my business. It's something I'm very passionate about. And when I'm looking through my civic engagement and what I want to do, it's something that I see the rules and the laws that we have through the laws of Black history, and seeing, history is the reason like why things are the way they are today. So knowing like for the right to vote, I take that very seriously because I know my ancestors fought very hard for a right they probably didn't get a chance to have. And so for me, I know when I turn 18, I'm definitely going to vote because my ancestors fought so hard for me to be in the position I am today. So Black history definitely inspires me in my civic engagement.
For me, Black history is important because you just think about the history that our ancestors have been through. Just think about everything that they worked so hard when, going through their times that they were going through. And looking at today, how, things have, been broadened, been upgraded, things to that nature. You see, you're like, wow, man, all the hard work is paying off. It's still a lot of work to do, going through this processes, because that goes with the younger generation to the day, how they see fit and how they see fit going on in the future for them. So it's important for us to know our history and to dig deep into our history, because it's a lot of passion, man. Honestly, it's really a lot of passion, and it's just a lot of hard work and dedication that took place for them and for us, and to get to what we at today.
Excellent. Let me ask a follow-up question for you, Chris, and also for you, Andrew. Chris, we saw the NFL and football players have a tremendous impact this past year by using their voice. How do you plan to use your voice, and your fellow players in the NFL plan to use your voice moving forward? And what advice do you have to our student athletes who are at the high school level, many of whom will play at the collegiate level and hopefully the professional level? What advice do you have for them as well?
I think most importantly, man, continue your education.
You're breaking up.
Keep that's the one. Graduate.
Chris, I think we lost you for a minute. Can you start again?
To work hard towards your degree in high school. It is kind of crazy for the Wi-Fi. Hello?
Yep. Yeah, I think you're clear. You can just start over.
Okay. I think it's important for us to get our grades first and our degree if we're in college, working toward that. I know for me, that was a struggle. I'm gonna tell you now. I struggled with taking care of my grades in the beginning. I had to be on academic probation because I didn't take it serious. And I was on academic probation. My mom told me, look, you don't want to come back to Columbus, Georgia, because you know what Columbus, Georgia is. It's a small city. A lot of things going on there, a lot of violence, a lot of drugs, things like that. So for me, it was more important to get my education and working towards that degree. I think for them, we have to basically continue to educate. And I'm all over the place with this question. Could I get that question again?
Sure. The question is, what advice do you have for current student athletes in terms of being civically engaged? And I think your answer is spot on. The first thing is we need to be able to control what we can control, and that's our grades. Keeping your grades high gives you the ability to get into great schools, gives you some ability to have input and have a voice. So if you want to continue along those lines, that's great. And the other part of the was about what you and your fellow NFL players are planning to do moving forward.
Yeah, I want to go back on that. Like as far as the education, because we don't know what sports may lead to. Injuries are involved. Things can happen. We don't know if we can make it that far, but if you continue to get your grades, your education, that's going to take you to the next level. As far as the NFL, we are making a change as far as like having those conversations, like I said before, among each other, with our brothers, like white, black, who's ever in that locker room. Like we're going to continue to make a fit and make sure that our communities know that we care about them, and we're gonna make sure that we're on the same level as them, and everybody is equal. We're all trying to be involved. We're all trying to make sure that everyone in the NFL and outside of the NFL knows that we care, and we're generally going to be here and continue to work hard to let people know that, hey, this is what we believe in. We're going to stand forth on it, and this is our ground, and this is our platform to share and educate others to know that, hey, this is what we care about.
Excellent, thank you, Andrew. Do you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, I want to, I guess, amplify a lot of what a couple others have said before, because I think it relates to this. So Dr. Brock talked about looking around you and seeing what you can change and what you can influence, and I think it takes us back to some of what Patrice said on the front end around the definition of civic engagement, right? So if you exist within a community, whether it be your school or your town, whatever it might be, there are things that you can begin impacting today. There are things that you can look around and say, hey, this isn't quite what I would like it to be. I believe that this can be made better. And you can look within yourself, much like Janiah did, and say, hey, here's how I can change that. And you may not be able to move it miles right now, but those first few steps are oftentimes the hardest steps. And so I think a lot can be done just by kind of just looking around you. And students oftentimes, I think, need that encouragement and that motivation, that empowerment from those of us who are educating them and are responsible for developing them for the future. So that's first and foremost. From a sport perspective, I think Chris touched on this. Definitely the society looks up to our athletes, right? We've had a rich history, especially in the US, other countries as well, but definitely in the United States, where athletes have stood up and asked society to take a long, hard look at itself and make a change. So if I think about Muhammad Ali, John Carlos and others, like they've led the way, and the current batch of athletes, Naomi Osaka, Rennie Montgomery, they've continued to do that work. And so, if you are an athlete, To Chris's point, educate yourself, be more aware of what's going on, understand the connections between things, learn about your history, learn how that history has led us to this current moment. Because one day, even if it isn't now, I think Chris made a really important point. It may not be now that you need to jump in and do what you want to do, but you might be setting yourself up for something in the future, whether it be on the field, on the court, or in court, so to speak. Whatever professional role you have to play in your life, you can make a difference. And so an awareness of what is going on is important. Yeah, I kind of think about voting as almost like game day, but I think civic engagement is watching film, doing those reps in the weight room. If you don't understand what's going on, you could get to game day, be ready to vote and not know what choice to make. You know what choice to make if you're adequately prepared, if you know what's going on in the community.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to ask this question of all of the panelists. Many of you have mentioned the need to learn, to be engaged in the classroom, but to also step out of the classroom and to learn things on your own. And I want to ask this question. How do you foster lifelong learning, particularly with topics that may be, at least initially, uncomfortable or with things that you're unfamiliar with? Let's start with Janiah.
Yes, so I'm definitely an advocate for talking about things that are uncomfortable, because if you want to learn history, you have to keep an open mind and hear, how history has affected others. And for me, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And if you are studying American history and you're not uncomfortable, then you're not studying it right, because American history and the history of America is a history of faults, a history of other people getting hurt and things affecting races, different races and racism. And I think you really need, if you're studying things, you need an open mind, because things are very uncomfortable to talk about. But unless you talk about those conversations, you're not going to have the open mind to learn about other people and interact with other people.
Patrice, would you like to respond?
Yes, first of all, I just want to say right on to Janiah. If you're studying American history and you're not uncomfortable, then you're not studying it correctly. Okay. But yeah, I think that we could begin, right? Like by introducing these uncomfortable topics and this uncomfortable information to our children at a very young age. Like that's part of the reason why I write children's books. I write children's books because a book is quite often a child's first introduction to the outside world, right? So if we're going to introduce them to the outside world, then why not introduce them to worlds, to experiences, to unfamiliar spaces in a way that's palatable, in a way that's engaging, in a way that's fun. So we could begin at the beginning, right? By introducing this information to our children early on, so that either A, the conversation won't be uncomfortable, or B, they'll be accustomed to, like Janiah said, being uncomfortable. They'll be comfortable with being uncomfortable. But then I think another thing that kind of gets lost in the sauce is introducing or getting people to realize how these uncomfortable topics can impact them personally, right? I know that being selfish kind of gets a bad rap, but the reality is most people are selfish by nature, you know what I'm saying? And self-preservation is the first law of man. It's like we got this whole self-care trend that's happening right now. And I think that part of the reason why it's happening is because people are learning that you really can't take care of others until you take care of yourself. So I think that we should be unafraid to tap into that, be unafraid to tap into the selfish nature of people, you know what I'm saying? And help them to realize how learning about these unfamiliar topics are going to benefit them. Otherwise, why would somebody want to do something that's going to bring them discomfort, right? You have to be able to demonstrate to me a way that this is going to benefit me or benefit the people around me, or, you know, I can see just some long-term benefit from that. So I think that's one of the things that we have to be unafraid to tap into also. You know, let people know how it's going to benefit them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's go to Chris. What do you do to foster being a lifelong learner, and what advice do you have to people listening today about being a lifelong learner, especially with topics that are uncomfortable or with which they're unfamiliar?
First of all, the education of it. I had to learn. For me, I had to learn not the hard way, but I had to go back, because when my son was first born, I wasn't educated like the way I am today. Like I have a black 4-year-old son, and I have to be able to prepare him for what's to come into his life, how he is going to be as a black African man when he's growing up. So I think, you know, as far as like that, you have to instill in those things into him now. You know what's going on. Not not too much, but just the small things of what's going on in the world, and how he has to take care of himself being a black child. I think that was one of the things that you know, I had to get myself prepared for. And now I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure out different ways on to better, you know, better ourselves, better us, and I think that's what's important.
Thank you. Excellent. Andrew, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I'll just use a sports metaphor, because I think sports is so powerful. So, you know, what's the best way, you know, to be comfortable doing push-ups? It's the start, right? You know, that first one is always gonna hurt. The next day, everything is gonna be sore. But the more you do push-ups, the more likely you are to continue doing it, and the more likely that 10 years from now you'd still be doing them, right? And I think it's the same thing around these topics. So to kind of piggyback off of, you know, something Patrice said, the earlier you start these conversations, the earlier you start having them, the earlier you engage kids around them, the better. You know, my kids are age 8 now. They eat broccoli because they started at age 2. You know, if I try to introduce it at age 8, and they'll be kicking and screaming. So we need to start young. We need to make sure they understand the relevance of these things to them. And definitely history is a great teacher and a great tool around that for sure.
Kaycee.
Yeah, I love this question so much that I wrote down a couple notes while other people were talking. One thing I thought about was being brave. I think especially using the sports metaphor, I think a lot of times young people, sometimes athletes, sometimes people in certain groups of people don't necessarily feel like they have to go outside of their bubble to engage with people, to socialize, to be a part of like a larger community, right? And I think that being brave enough and bold enough to go outside of the norm, to be able to engage with people who are different than you is so important. And I mean, well, beyond race, right? Because I think if any of us were to think about things that we care about, a lot of times it takes us interacting with someone who is different than us to learn about them. Then we start to care about that person, and then we start to care about the things that are important to that person. And that is where I think the real magic happens of becoming a lifelong learner. I even think about my own mother and how when I first went natural, she was like, girl, what you doing? Because she's from a generation that was like that. We learned to assimilate. We learned that we have to do certain things to be able to fit into corporate America. But now we, a younger generation, and then definitely the generation like Janiah's generation, is one that's like, no, like, let's be our authentic selves at work. And here's how. And we're constantly teaching and learning from each other. And so I think it's just really important to get outside of your bubble and to get to know different types of people so that you can start to care about different types of things. And then I think the other part is just being really passionate about something, because when you speak up and when you're passionate about something, I think that it invites conversation from lots of different types of people. And then that's where you start to, again, learn from others and kind of grow your own mindset in a lot of different ways. And I think like the last thing is just leading with empathy. And that one is a little tough, but leading with empathy and thinking about being in another person's shoes and what their experience might be like if unfortunately you don't get a chance to interact with someone who identifies as something different than you is really, really important, because then I think you open up your mind and you start to think about what could that person's walk be like. And then you start to think like, okay, this is something that I can care about and I want to learn more, read more, develop habits so that maybe every morning you're checking news on Twitter or however you might get it, but you're starting to just like build that habit of just being curious about other people. So I really think that magic comes from others, learning from others.
Excellent. This has been a great panel. I'm sure the people listening, the students listening have learned a lot from you and want to know how to learn more. So can you provide us with ways that we could connect with you, either through your social media, your website? If people want to ask follow-up questions or just want to follow where you're going. Let's start with Janiah.
Yes, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Slay It Proud. And you can buy t-shirts that I have like this, and also my own children's coloring book about Black history at www.slayitproud.com.
Chris, you're muted.
Yes, you can follow me on Instagram, chub74, and on Twitter is Hubbard74, as well as Facebook, Christopher Hubbard as well.
Kaycee.
Yeah, I'm not great on Twitter, but I am on there. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram is the same thing, which is Dr. D.R.K. Brock, B-R-O-C-K. And for anyone who's in high school, I'm a college access professional. Like that's my wheelhouse. So if you're interested in learning more about college, getting into college, tips and tricks for that, or educators, then you can follow me on those.
Andrew.
You can access RISE at risetowin.org, risetowin.org. So that's our website. And we are also on at Rise to Win on Twitter or Instagram.
Patrice.
So my website is patricemclaurin.com. Facebook is Thank an Inventor. My Instagram, y'all follow me, I'm trying to level up. My Instagram is at Patrice McLaurin, and my Twitter is at McLaurin Writes.
Great, thank you. And I hope all of you will come to the museum's website, the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, nmaahc.si.edu. We certainly have a lot of information related to African American history that you can access all throughout the year. I want to thank you for participating in this session, and for those of you who are participating in our other sessions, thank you for attending. If you have not been able to see our previous sessions, please send an email to characterplaybook@everfi.com or follow EverFi on Twitter at CharacterP. Thank you so much, and please continue to do all that you can to learn more about Black history this month and throughout the rest of the year. Thank you.